walked down the street like a good girl should. He followed me down.
She was Australia's voice in the land of dreams, a rising star who conquered American television, filled country music charts, and stood shoulder to shoulder with the greatest names of her time. Yet one day, Diana Trask disappeared from the spotlight. Without warning, without farewell. Whispers circled for decades, but few dared to say it aloud. She was punished for saying no. In an industry ruled by powerful men behind closed doors, Diana Trask did something most female artists of the 1970s wouldn't even dare to imagine. She challenged her manager. Not in the tabloids, not on stage, but in the quiet, bitter negotiations behind the glamour. And from that moment on, her name was silently erased from every stage she once dominated. Long before the world spoke of Me Too, long before speaking up became a movement, Diana's quiet rebellion was met not with justice, but with isolation. She was a woman from Melbourne who had cracked the American dream, only to realize that the cost of integrity was her entire career. But this is not just a story of punishment. It's about power, silence, and the invisible machinery of fame that can lift a star or crush it. Behind the rhinestones and the smiles was a woman who carried the weight of knowing too much and saying just enough to be dangerous. Today, Diana Trask's name is barely whispered outside of niche country playlists and dusty vinyl collections. But once, she stood at the center of an empire. And when she walked away, it wasn't because she had nothing left to say. It was because the stage had been taken from her. This is the story of how success turned into silence, and how a single act of resistance turned a golden girl into an exile. Diana Rosalind Trask was born in 1940 in Melbourne, Australia, far from the honky-tonk highways of Nashville or the neon glare of Las Vegas. Her voice, however, seemed to belong to another world entirely. From an early age, she was steeped in the music of American swing and ballads, absorbing melodies from Billie Holiday and Ella Fitzgerald as though by instinct. She sang not just with precision, but with emotion, a rare thing for a teenager barely out of high school. By the late 1950s, she was already a name in Australian circles, appearing regularly on national radio and television. But her ambitions could not be contained within the island continent. In 1959, she made a bold decision to leave everything behind and try her luck in the United States. At the time, it was nearly unheard of for an Australian female artist to seek fame abroad, especially in a market as saturated and fiercely competitive as America's. She arrived in the US as a fresh-faced, impeccably poised singer with a controlled vibrato and an elegant stage presence. Her break came quickly. Diana was invited to perform on The Mitch Miller Show on NBC, a widely watched program that catapulted her into American living rooms weekly. She wasn't just a guest, she became a recurring feature. Her voice, a smooth blend of clarity and sorrow, charmed viewers across the nation. It was the early 1960s, and Diana Trask was becoming a household name. But television was only the beginning. She signed with Columbia Records, releasing pop albums that flirted with moderate success. Still, something wasn't clicking. Her image, sweet, polished, soft-spoken, felt too manufactured, too distant from the rawness she felt inside. And America, in those years, was shifting. The folk revival was rising, Motown was exploding, and country music was finding a new generation of listeners not in the Deep South, but on the edges of suburbia. Diana felt that pull too. In the late 60s, she made a move that stunned her fans and puzzled the executives. She transitioned into country music. To outsiders, it looked like a desperate attempt to stay relevant. But to Diana, it was a return to something more honest. The song spoke of heartbreak, betrayal, and strength. Themes she understood not just as a singer, but as a woman navigating the brutal undercurrents of the entertainment world. And the gamble paid off. Her first country releases under Dot Records earned her a new fan base. Tracks like Say When, Oh Boy, and It's a Man's World, If You Have a Man Like Mine, entered the Billboard country charts. Suddenly, Diana was no longer a novelty foreigner with a curious accent. She was a serious contender in a genre dominated by American legends. Nashville took notice, but so did the men who ran it. What most fans didn't see, what no record sleeve or TV interview could show, was the tightening grip of control behind the scenes. Diana had become a marketable product, and that meant she was expected to behave like one. Appear where she was told, dress how they advised, sing what they selected. She was given a manager whose influence extended far beyond booking shows. He controlled her image, her contracts, even her private life. At first, she complied. Like so many women in the industry, she believed in paying her dues. But soon, the rules became unreasonable. The expectations crossed into exploitation. Promises were made and broken. Opportunities were dangled and then withdrawn. When she began to question decisions, when she asked for transparency in her finances, creative freedom in her music, she was met not with conversation, but with silence. It was then that Diana did something few artists dared. She pushed back. What followed was not a public fallout. There were no tabloid feuds or messy lawsuits. Instead, she was quietly removed from the spotlight. Tour dates dried up, radio airplay slowed. Media coverage shifted to newer, more compliant faces. The same system that had once lifted her to fame was now closing its doors, one by one. This was not just a career shift. It was an exile, enforced not by public opinion, but by silent, calculated decisions from behind the curtain. And yet, Diana never spoke out in rage. She returned to Australia, disappeared from headlines, and left behind an entire chapter of history that very few were allowed to remember. But those who followed her career closely knew something had happened, something offstage, something unspoken. And now, finally, we begin to speak it. It all began so gently. Diana Trask was not the rebellious type. She was, by all accounts, composed, disciplined, even modest. Her early life in Melbourne was shaped by a traditional household and a strong work ethic. She studied classical piano, excelled in school, and found her way to the microphone through local talent contests. There was no scandal, no pushy stage mother, no backdoor deals. Just a girl with a voice so rich it made grown men stop talking. By age 19, she had already recorded singles that reached the Australian charts. But America was always calling. With the quiet determination of someone who knew her worth, she booked a one-way ticket to the US. Her first stops were grueling. Small clubs, auditions, late nights with no guarantees. But her persistence paid off when Mitch Miller, then a powerful figure at Columbia Records and NBC, spotted her talent. Appearing on Sing Along with Mitch wasn't just a break, it was a national platform. Millions of Americans tuned in, and Diana, with her crisp diction and graceful demeanor, became a familiar face. Her Australian accent, slightly softened for broadcast, gave her an exotic appeal. She wasn't brash or flashy, she was refined, accessible, and perfectly marketable. During this time, Columbia pushed her as a pop artist. She recorded albums and made appearances on mainstream talk shows. But behind the polished front, Diana was feeling increasingly boxed in. The songs didn't reflect who she was. The image crafted for her, a delicate flower in a garden of men, was suffocating. She smiled for cameras, but offstage, she craved something real. The first real turning point came after her marriage to Tom Ewan, a former singer turned businessman. Ewan became her de facto manager, helping her navigate the American industry with more control. With his support, she began shifting her focus toward Nashville, believing that country music might offer the emotional depth and honesty she longed to express. It was a daring move. Diana was an outsider, not just a woman in a male-dominated genre, but a foreigner trying to carve a place in America's most insular musical community. But the gamble worked. Country radio gave her a cautious welcome. Her voice, which once delivered pop ballads with pristine polish, now trembled with twang, heartache, and grit. Say When reached number 13 on the country charts. Oh Boy, a Buddy Holly cover, became a fan favorite. Between 1970 and 1975, she had a string of top 40 country hits, 11 in total. But country music success came at a price. The Nashville scene of the early 70s was tight-knit, old-fashioned, and controlled by a few key power players, mostly men. The studios, radio stations, and performance circuits were governed by unwritten rules, and loyalty to certain managers or producers often mattered more than talent. Diana, fiercely independent, resisted those games. She insisted on choosing her material, questioned how her tour revenue was handled, and challenged decisions she felt were manipulative. That's when things began to change. The studio sessions grew colder. Producers who once praised her began suggesting new directions that veered off her path. Some tour offers mysteriously fell through. Reviewers, once generous, now described her as difficult or detached. One industry insider allegedly remarked, "Diana doesn't play ball." That phrase would follow her like a shadow. The most glaring shift came from her relationship with her then manager in Nashville, a man rumored to have deep ties with booking agencies and label executives. Diana had grown uncomfortable with how her career was being handled. She suspected mismanagement, money disappearing, commitments not honored. When she confronted him, she found herself stonewalled. Not long after, a quiet campaign to sideline her began. She wasn't blacklisted publicly, but the doors simply stopped opening. She tried to fight back. She wrote letters. She made calls. But in an industry built on favors and silence, speaking up wasn't strength. It was career suicide. And the industry made it clear, Diana Trask had outlived her usefulness. By 1978, the hits had stopped. Her final country single failed to chart. She made one last television appearance, smiling through a performance of Lean It All on Me, a song that sounded eerily like a goodbye. She was only in her late 30s. Most artists at that age are just beginning to ripen. But for Diana, the American chapter was over. She packed up, left Nashville, and returned to Australia with her husband. The woman who had once graced the stages of Las Vegas, stood beside Glenn Campbell, and charted with legends, was now gone from the scene entirely. There was no scandal in the tabloids, no drug story, no messy divorce, just silence, a silence far louder than any headline. For years, fans and journalists speculated about what really happened to Diana Trask. Why would a singer with charting hits, prime television exposure, and a distinctive voice suddenly vanish from the industry without explanation? Some assumed burnout. Others whispered about family obligations or a lack of ambition. But the truth was far more uncomfortable and far more familiar than most dared to admit. In rare interviews decades later, Diana would speak in cautious, measured terms. She never named names. She never threw anyone under the bus. But between the lines, a pattern emerged, a pattern of quiet coercion, gaslighting, and the unspoken price of saying no. It wasn't one dramatic incident. It was a slow erosion, a war of attrition where every act of resistance, however small, came with consequences. Sources close to Diana recalled how she was pressured to maintain a certain public image, one that clashed with her evolving identity as an artist and as a woman. At a time when the country music industry was still deeply patriarchal, Trask's refusal to play the demure, compliant lady singer role made her a liability. Her insistence on financial transparency, fair contracts, and creative input wasn't seen as professional. It was seen as difficult. One former studio engineer recalled an exchange where Diana walked out of a session after being told to leave the thinking to the men. That kind of defiance didn't sit well in a world where decisions were made over bourbon and handshakes, far from the recording booth. Then came the fallout with her Nashville manager. While details remain vague, multiple accounts confirm that Diana challenged the terms of her contract after uncovering irregularities in revenue reports and tour logistics. She wanted out. But instead of negotiating a fair exit, the manager reportedly called in favors. Promoters stopped booking her. Radio programmers moved on. Industry friends turned cold. Without anyone saying it out loud, she was locked out of the system. The cruelty was in the subtlety. There was no public shaming, no dramatic scandal to explain her absence. She simply faded by design. One month she was performing on the Grand Ole Opry, and the next she was back in Melbourne, sitting in a quiet house, watching her records collect dust. The woman who once shared billing with Tammy Wynette and George Jones now found herself unable to land a basic TV spot in Nashville. Media reactions were polite but dismissive. Articles in Billboard or Country Music Magazine referred to her in past tense, as if her career had ended naturally. There was no investigation, no expose, because no one wanted to rock the boat. Diana's story was inconvenient. It didn't align with the myth of the male genius shaping the career of a grateful female star. Her fans, however, did notice. Letters poured into stations, asking why her songs were no longer played. Some even wrote directly to labels, only to receive canned responses or nothing at all. For those who truly followed her journey, the silence was deafening and suspicious. Behind closed doors, Diana struggled with bitterness, confusion, and a sense of betrayal. She had believed in the music. She had believed in fairness. But the machinery of fame had no room for conscience. And yet, she never lashed out. She never wrote a tell-all or sought revenge. Instead, she turned inward, channeling her pain into private writings, poems, and eventually a memoir published years later, filled with restraint and dignity, but also unmistakable sadness. One quote from her memoir still lingers like a wound left open. Open quote, "They didn't take away my voice. They just made sure no one could hear it." Close quote. Perhaps that's the most haunting truth of all. Diana Trask wasn't defeated by scandal or addiction or self-destruction. She was erased for refusing to surrender. Her story, once buried beneath layers of industry silence, now resurfaces not with fury, but with clarity. In a post-Me Too world, we see it for what it was. Not a fall, but a silencing. Not a decline, but a consequence for being a woman who said enough. Diana Trask's story is one of grace, colliding with a system that didn't know what to do with a woman who thought for herself. From our perspective here at Aussie Uncovered, her journey is not just about a singer who made it big in America. It's about the cost of autonomy in an industry that rewards submission and punishes defiance. She was not the loudest name in the headlines, nor the flashiest performer on stage. But Diana brought something far more enduring: integrity. Her music, whether it was pop, jazz, or country, carried a thread of authenticity that never bent to trend or manipulation. And that, ultimately, may have been her undoing. It's easy to praise resilience in hindsight. But when Diana was being pushed out, softly, strategically, and without recourse, no one stepped forward to defend her. Not the industry, not the networks, not the fellow artists she had once performed alongside. That silence reveals more about the culture of the time than any gossip column ever could. She belonged to an era when women were expected to be grateful for whatever spotlight they were given and to remain silent about what went on behind the curtain. Diana Trask refused that bargain. She wanted more than fame. She wanted fairness. And when she didn't get it, she chose to walk away rather than stay and rot from the inside. Was she perfect? No. Like any artist, she had moments of doubt, missteps in career decisions, and clashes with the people around her. But her downfall wasn't due to lack of talent or relevance. It came because she questioned the system that fed her. And when a machine that powerful is questioned, it protects itself by eliminating the threat. Quietly, efficiently. We believe Diana deserves to be remembered not only for her contributions to Australian music, but for her quiet defiance in the face of systemic control. She paved the way, perhaps unknowingly, for future generations of female artists who would later find the strength, the platform, and the allies to say what she could only imply. And now, we turn to you, our audience. Have you heard of Diana Trask before this video? Did you ever wonder what happened to her? Do you believe the music industry has truly changed? Or do stories like Diana's still unfold behind closed doors, just more carefully masked? Is silence still the price for speaking up? Let us know what you think. Share your impressions, your memories if you have any, and your reflections. Because the only way stories like Diana's survive is if they are told and retold, not as footnotes, but as the warnings they were meant to be. Some say Diana Trask simply stepped away, that she chose family, peace, and a quiet life over the chaos of fame. And perhaps that's partly true, but those who listened closely, really listened, could hear something else behind her silence. The ache of a voice that was never allowed to sing its final verse. She could have been one of country music's enduring icons. She had the voice, the discipline, the audience. She had the story of the underdog who made it from suburban Melbourne to the heart of Nashville. But in an industry built on control, Diana's refusal to play the part cost her everything. Still, her records remain. Press play on Say When or It's a Man's World, and you'll hear it. That blend of melancholy and strength, the voice of a woman who sang not just to entertain, but to survive. Her performances were never flashy, never hollow. They were full, rich, lived in, as if each note carried a truth she couldn't say out loud. There's a kind of sadness in the way she vanished. No grand farewell concert, no tribute album, no media storm, just the quiet disappearance of a woman who had once sung to millions, now humming softly in her own kitchen, unseen. But maybe that's what makes her story so haunting. It lingers, it echoes. It makes you wonder how many other Diana Trasks there were. How many voices we never got to hear because they didn't fit the mold, didn't stay in line, didn't say yes when they should have said no. Her legacy isn't built on platinum records or sold-out arenas. It's built on principle, on the strength to walk away when staying meant surrender. And that, perhaps, is the greatest act of artistry of all. Some stories are never told, but now you know. And once you know, you never forget.